Dit is sessie 13 en die paneelbespreking handel oor die jong mense en hoe hanteer en hoe dink en hoe werk ons jong mense met wysheid in 'n tyd soos hierdie. Jana, baie dankie. Ek gaan die hele sessie vir Jana gee om die aanbieding te doen, haar paneellede voor te stel en daarmee voort te gaan. Sy sal ook met u 'n reëling tref wanneer hulle gereed is om die gesprek na u toe te gee by die tafels. Baie dankie Jana, baie welkom. U ken almal vir Jana de Lange. Jana, baie welkom.
Baie dankie Dewyk. Goeiemiddag almal. Dis vir my baie groot voorreg en 'n lekkerte om vanmiddag weer hier saam met julle te wees. Ek was eintlik natuurlik gewoonlik deel van die span wat hier sit. Maar soos baie van julle dalk weet, ek het einde Julie het ek klaargemaak by NG Universiteitswoord en ek werk nou in 'n ander hoedanigheid met studente wat vir my 'n groot voorreg is, maar dit was lekker dat Paul hulle my genooi het om vandag se gesprek met ons paneellede te voer. Soos die ek wil sê program dit noem, dit is vandag nou die geleentheid vir die paneellede gaan ons bietjie praat oor jong mense se stemme in 'n tyd soos hierdie en wat is hulle perspektief op hierdie tyd en wat die kerk se rol is. Ek gaan nou ons paneellede aan u bekendstel, maar ek gaan die res van hierdie gesprek gaan ek persoonlik in Engels praat. The reason being is that one of our panelists, Tebogo Mpelo, is mostly English, although he does understand Afrikaans. So I have agreed that I will lead the discussion in English, but whereas all the other panelists are mostly Afrikaans, they are invited to answer in the tongue or the language that they feel most comfortable in. But I trust that all of us do understand English since we watch TV from time to time. And I hope you can benefit from the discussion. When we have the Q&A session from the floor, wanneer ons vrae en antwoorde neem, is jy welkom om ook in Afrikaans jou vraag te stel en die paneel aan wie dit gerig is, sal natuurlik ook antwoord soos hulle gemaklik is. To our panelists, welcome to all of you. It's wonderful to have you as part of the group, giving your insight and input into this discussion on wisdom in a time such as this from a youth, I want to say youth perspective, but technically we're like the young adults now, only just. So I'm going to maybe just quickly say the names of all the panelists, and then I'm going to give you each a chance to introduce yourself personally. So I'll be starting there at the end. Our first three panelists, most of you or many of you would know since they are part of the Northern Synod. Hulle is dominees in die Noordelike Sinode of op een of ander manier by bediening betrokke. Op die punt daar is Dewald Roux by NG Vorentoe. Dan is dit Ernst van Wyk, hy's by NG Linwood. Charlotte Sibagnoni, my oud-kollega by NG Universiteitswoord. En dan ons twee paneellede hier closer to me is the first is Clarindi Elof. She is a medical doctor, but she will tell a bit more of her story. Also welcome to her husband Daniel, who joined her today. It's wonderful to have you both here. And then closest to me is Tebogo Mpelo. He is a mechanical engineer working at Accenture, but once again, they will give some more intro to themselves. So maybe Dewald, I can start with you to just say a bit more about yourself.
Goeiemiddag vriende, baie dankie vir die geleentheid om hier te wees. Ons het maar so ooreengekom dat ons wel so gaan oorskakel tussen Engels en Afrikaans en so probeer om net ons dit 'n inklusiewe gesprek te maak, maar baie dankie vir die geleentheid. Ek is Dewald Roux. Ek is gebore in Pretoria in Oos-London in die Oos-Kaap groot geword. En toe het ek verhuis na Kaapstad. My pa was in die staatsdiens gewees, gematrikuleer by HTS Bellville in die Kaap. Ek moet dit nou ongelukkig sê in hierdie gehoor, ek het by Stellenbosch geswat, jammer daaroor. En toe het ek 'n praktiese jaar in die Parel gedoen. Ek het so kort rukkie afgelos in die Weskus, terwyl een van die leraars met lang verlof was. En toe het ek in 2013 in Junie 2013 verhuis na Brits. Ons moes Google waar dit is toe ons die pos gekry het. Was nie heeltemal seker nie en ek is sedertdien in Brits leraar, so dis so 9 jaar en 'n paar maande 'n ongelooflike voorreg om deel van die gemeenskap te kan wees in die noorde. So dis my storie. Ek is getroud. My vrou is 'n finale jaar mediese student. Sy maak einde van hierdie jaar hopelik klaar. So dis Dewald, dankie.
Great, dankie Dewald. Ernst.
Goeiemiddag, ek is Ernst van Wyk. Ek is 'n proponent nou al vir omtrent, seker bietjie meer as 10 jaar, so ek is besig om nou 'n tienerlike proponent te word. Ek help uit by NG Linwood, ek het 'n deeltydse pos daarso en dan met die ander deel van my tyd is ek bietjie aan die skryf in die filmindustrie en ek doen 'n bietjie acting en dan is ek ook 'n persoonlike afrigter, 'n personal trainer wat ook so my inkomste genereer. So ek het 'n vinger in 'n klomp verskillende pies.
Hey, dankie, Charlotte.
Hallo almal, ek is Charlotte en ek is by NG Universiteitsoord en dan is ek ook by die universiteit en ek gee eerstejaartjies Hebreëus en ek is besig met my PhD en ek bid myself om nou klaar te maak en werk ook om nou klaar te maak.
Right, dankie Charlotte. Clarendie.
Ek is Clarendie Elof. Ek is gebore eintlik in Johannesburg, maar ek het groot geword in die Valdriehoek in Vereniging. En toe is ek koshuis toe in Pretoria waar ek by my sussoor was. En na dit het ek gaan medies swat by die Universiteit van Pretoria. Toe het ek vir 2 jaar my internskap gedoen by Kalafong Hospitaal ook hier in Pretoria. En toe is ek geplaas in die Vrystaat vir my gemeenskapsdiensjaar. Toe het ek vir 'n jaar so tussen die plase rondgery met 'n bakkie wat hulle vir my gegee het. En toe het ek nou 'n pos gekry in die posisie waarna ek altyd wou gewees het in pediatrie by Leratong Hospitaal in Krugersdorp. So in terme van my persoonlike lewe ek is getroud met Daniel, soos wat Jana gesê het. Hy is 'n prokureur, ons bly tans nog steeds in die Valdriehoek. Maar ja, baie dankie vir die geleentheid om hier te wees.
Right, thanks. And Wochel.
I don't even know how to start, right? So the closest thing I can say in Afrikaans, because I took Afrikaans in eerste addisionele taal in matric. So the closest I can say in Afrikaans is die hond blaf. So that's the closest that I can say. So please forgive me if I... thank you so much. But I can actually hear a bit more of Afrikaans from time to time, so I understood what everyone was saying. But I would appreciate it if we have this conversation in English if you're asking me a question directed to me. So who is Tebogo Mpelo? I am a young man out of Soshanguve. It is a township in Pretoria. Born and bred in Pretoria, spent most of my life in Pretoria. Attended an Afrikaans primary and high school as well. Was a bit ambitious about studying medicine at some point, but I felt like it was going to be boring. I was like, let me try something a bit difficult. So unlike Clarindi, I'm a mechanical engineer. Studied at the University of Pretoria. And at the time that I was at the University of Pretoria, which is the big question is, why am I here? I was involved in a lot of student leadership activities, was involved in a lot of resident activities, and I got an opportunity, a unique opportunity to work around young people and understand what some of their concerns have been over the years. And to finally add on to that, currently, I'm not a practicing engineer. I work in business. I am a strategy consultant at a management consulting firm. So to kind of give you a picture of what that is, we are doctors for businesses. So a client comes to us and asks us, look, I want to grow my business by X amount, and then we provide recommendations on how they can improve their business. I can promise you, I'm not from McKinsey, I'm not from Bain, so I don't defraud the state. So just to give you a bit of confidence there. Sure, that's me, Tebogo.
Great, thank you, Tebogo. So the church really needs to grow its business. So can we, hire you as our consultant going forward?
Ooh, I don't know about that.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to meet you all. I just want to brag a bit on our 2 outside panelists' behalf. They obviously won't do it by themselves. The reason why we got them is they are not only voices from our side, but people who have achieved several things, and therefore we consider their voice to be something to listen to. Of course, we listen to everyone's voice, but maybe some extra credentials right there. So Tebogo is one of the few recipients of the A.B. Bailey bursary. This bursary is only awarded to 1 student per academic institution per year. And he is one of those who was rewarded that bursary, which is a wonderful achievement. He is a young man with great skills, and as he also said, he was part of a group at university, the Inactus group, about where student entrepreneurship is developed globally. And he was also the president of this society for 1 year in 2016. So he's a man with a broad perspective on not only mechanical engineering or company consultation, but also entrepreneurship and various other perspectives. He is also a member of the Christchurch Midrand. So he comes from a different faith, not a different faith perspective, but denominational perspective. So we're also grateful to have you here, and please share into that. Vir Clarindi, sy self was ook hoofmeisie by Affies meisies of Afrikaans voor meisies, ek moet reg praat. En sy was ook junior burgemeester op hoërskool. So dit is saam met die res van die paneel regtig besondere paneellede wat ons hier het. En vandag vir my is dit lekker, soos ek sê, I'm here as parents actually said, met 'n vinger in elke paai. So I was a pastor obviously until recently, but now working at the Veenstra group in student accommodation, so also trying to give a bit of an outside perspective, but mostly still inside the church. So the first question that I'd like to direct at our panelists, and now Tebogo, I'm going to put you on the spot and start this way around, is so the whole discussion theme of the synod has been wisdom in a time such as this. Wysheid in 'n tyd soos hierdie. So first, before we get to the wisdom part, which is the more complicated part, we'd like to hear your perspective on how do you see our current times, our current context in South Africa. It's 2022, not 2019 pre-COVID, but let me not run ahead of myself. So maybe your perspective currently about the time we are in.
Sure. I think I'll start first with one big point that we see that is happening globally amongst young people. So I'm working on an interesting project right now at the moment, and there's a US-based company that is trying to provide content for young people and become more relevant for young people. And one of the big questions that they always ask us is, what are young people searching for? What are they looking for online? And when we did our research, quantitative and qualitative as well, and we're interviewing a couple of young people across different markets in Africa, Nigeria, Kenya, Ghana, and South Africa as well. The big theme that keeps on coming up is that a lot of these young people are getting information from these social media platforms, and they are conflicted about perspectives. And it's an interesting view that we are starting to see, not only that is specific to South Africa, but all across the world. And if I were to speak about a time such as this, is that as individuals that are living in society and as leaders that are leading in society, we need to understand what are the relevant topics that young people are having and discussing on these platforms. It could be based on sexual orientation. It could be based on racial demographics and how are we represented in a country such as South Africa. And you find that on platforms such as Twitter, young people are having these debates. And as leaders in society, we need to be informed. We need to understand what is the facts and what are the different opinions that young people are speaking about. And that will help us become much more relevant, because this is the conversation that is on the tips of young people in society today. So if I were to say that what is the biggest thing that we are witnessing and seeing in the world, we need leadership that is relevant, that can speak to the hearts and the minds of young people, that understands the problems of young people. And often at times, we were young, but the problems that young people face in today's day and age is not the same that we were facing back then. So we need to be clued up, and we need to understand what those challenges are so that we are relevant. And in so doing, when we understand where they're coming from, we can lead them from their view. Because you always have this big construct that is happening between senior management in companies and younger people in companies, where we tend to misunderstand one another. But when we give ourselves an opportunity to understand why do they think the way that they think, we can provide better solutions that is tailored for them, so that we know that whatever solutions we're designing is relevant for them. That's my quick point.
Great, thank you Tebogo. Clarindi.
Goed, ek gaan sommer in Afrikaans antwoord. Toe ek moes gedink het oor 'n tyd soos hierdie, het ek heel eers begin dink aan al die probleme wat ons kan opnoem. En ons kan ons nou dink aan, julle het nou al seker hierdie gesprek 'n paar keer gehad. Ek wil nou nie weer herhaal nie, maar ek sal vinnig sê wat ek aan gedink het. Ek het gedink aan goeie soos die oorlog wat ons nou het. Dit is iets wat al eeue heen gebeur, is oorloë. Aan goeie soos die kindertjies wat ons by die werk sien, wat nou ongelooflik met wanvoeding by ons aankom. Maar armoede is iets wat al deur die eeue heen gebeur, wat ons al deur eeue heen sien. Mense wat arm is en mense wat nie aan hulle behoeftes voldoen word nie. Selfs die pandemie, ons dink nou dit is 'n verskriklike nuwe ding, maar oral, mense kan self sien van die Bybelse tyd, hoe daar siektes voorgekom het, hoe daar plaag was, jy weet, die melaatsheid, al daai dinge. So, wat maak hierdie tye nou so anders? Jy weet? En toe ek dan regtig begin dink, toe dink ek, die eerste ding is, ons wêreld is vinniger. Ons ekonomie is besig om vinniger te werk, ons lewe werk vinniger, ons kommunikasie werk vinniger. Ek bedoel, ek ry huis toe op die hoofweg, en daar's 'n ongeluk, en as ek by die kafee kom, wil ek vir die vrou sê, ons bly op 'n kleinerige plek, dan wil ek vir haar sê, hoorie, daar was 'n verskriklike ongeluk, dan sê sy, ja, ek het dit klaar gesien op sosiale media. En as 'n mens dink aan Winston Churchill wat die aand voor elke volgende dag, het hy die volgende dag se koerante by hom gehad om soort van nou voor te wees met die nuus. Maar dis glad nie meer hoe ons vandag funksioneer nie. Vandag is die nuus letterlik oombliklik. En ek noem hierdie verskynsel, as ek nou mooi daaraan dink, ek noem dit die wêreld druis in op ons. Die wêreld het al nader en nader gekom aan die individu se privaat lewe. En so voel ek ook byvoorbeeld met die kinders. Ek rig nou kinders af vir debat by meisies hoor, en ek voel dat waar ek as 'n skoolkind elke dag kon huis toe gaan, en voel ek los al daai dinamieke, julle weet die kinders is baie onder druk by die skool met die dinamieke tussen die maatjies en die konflik en die druk en al daai goeders. Elke dag as ek huis toe gegaan het ek daai goed by die skool gelos. En dit was my 'n verskriklike verligting. Maar wat ek sien wat nou met die kinders gebeur is hierdie goeders van die wêreld wat so raas, druis in op hulle bring letterlik daardie maatjies en die kritiek en al die goeders tot in hulle slaapkamer by die huis. So, en die ironie van hierdie hele saak is vir my, van ons tyd nou, soos wat die wêreld indruis op ons, sien mens dat die individu eintlik besig is om te vereensaam daar wat hy is. En ek glo die redes hiervan is 'n paar goeders. Ek dink eerstens, sosiale media skep 'n illusie dat 'n mens omring is deur mense. Dink nou net aan almal wie se kinders geëmigreer is. Hierdie sosiale media skep die illusie dat jou kinders met jou kontak het en so, maar eintlik is mense besig om baie te vereensaam. En die tweede ding daarvan is, na die COVID-pandemie, ek voel regtig, mense het vereensaam, hulle het van hulle gewoontes wat hulle gehad het, om met ander mense in kontak te kom, om uit te kom, was dalk nou vir hulle vrees, of die verhouding was nie in stand gehou nie, en ek voel, baie mense het nie voortgegaan met daai aktiwiteite nie, so daar's baie mense, wat na hierdie pandemie nie regtig weer uit daai eensaamheid uit kon kom nie, en ek voel, dit is die hoof ding van die wêreld waarvan ons nou leef, wat ek dink ons moet aanspreek.
Great, baie dankie Clarindi. Charlotte.
Wanneer ek dink current times, then I think of the need for change. En ek weet in ons tradisie as ons oor change, dan kry ons ook 'n kopseer terselfdertyd, maar daar's 'n need for change. COVID het 'n need for change gebring. Die tyd waarin ons nou leef, die jong mense is a different generation. I might be born 94, but born 2000s is 'n heeltemal ander mensies daai. And that requires a need for change to serve them as a church, as how we teach, as universities, as schools, as a community. I feel the need for change and adapting into this new dynamic of life that we're in. How we do church, how we teach, how we live, how we go about things. Technology, yes, is bringing us closer, but also how we go about how we used to do things. You know, so when I think current times, and you mentioned a very important point when you said leadership that is relevant, and that is us that is sitting here. So in terms of this change, how do we change and stay relevant? How do we, as Reformed, adapt as a church as well, and be relevant in this community that we are serving? You know, when we talk about reformation and the need for change and where we are as a church and that, when I hear current times, I really want to keep repeating that I'm hearing a need for change and adapting and being relevant to the community that we are currently serving.
Okay, Great, thank you, Charlotte. And that's the next question that we're going to lead into. So you're actually helping me there. But first, let's hear from Ernst en Dewald, julle perspektief op die tyd.
Ekskuus, om my gedagtes terug het ek eintlik maar iets neergeskryf. Ek is nou al 'n paar dae hier, so ek was nou al lank genoeg verveeld om bietjie te kan skryf. So ek het maar net nagedink oor dat dit nie net gaan oor jeug nie, maar ek dink ons is 'n element van 'n jeugtige wysheid wat dalk ook nodig is in 'n tyd soos hierdie. So as ek hierso kom begin lees, om te praat van wysheid in 'n tyd soos die is myns insiens dalk 'n tweedimensionele oorweging van wysheid. En om 'n dimensie van ruimte by te voeg is nodig om by 'n voller geheelbeeld van wysheid te kom. Ons almal ken die tye, maar ek is arrogant as ek oortuig is dat ek my broer of suster se konteks beter ken as hulle self. Sonder hierdie dimensie van ruimte is my wysheid baie so sparse long life karton melkkratte of van ikroneese preke. Die greep wat ek daarop het, hou selde tot by die kar. Siende hierdie paneel en handel oor wysheid van jeug, 'n jeugtige wysheid, wil ek noem dat die vyand, ek dink van hierdie wysheid, van 'n jong vars wysheid, is die arrogansie van jeug. En dis iets waarmee ek by hierdie einste sinode dalk gekonfronteer is by my lieflike tafel 6. Ek het besef, die allesomvattende transcendente wysheid waarmee ek self hier aangekom het, is eintlik maar nutteloos in die konteks van baie van my tafelkollegas. Die arrogansie van my jeug het my gelei om te glo my wysheid is nie gebonde aan die temporele of aan die geografiese nie. En dalk kan van nie assosieer hiermee. Hierdie arrogansie kan in tyd groei in verskeie vertakkings. Dit kan evolueer en verkalk en hardkoppigheid word. Waar my konservatiewe teologie dan hardkoppig groei in sy behoudendheid, waar my liberale teologie hardkoppig groei in haar soeke na nog 'n hok om te skud. As ek nie waak nie, word my jeugdige arrogansie hardkoppige teologie, waarvan God self my nie kan verlos nie. Die alternatief is dat my jeugdige arrogansie ontwikkel in waagmoed. Waagmoed om nie bedreig te voel deur dialoog met teologie en ideologie wat teenoor my staan nie. Waagmoed om my eie hardkoppigheid te erken. Waagmoed om nie geïntimideer te word deur my uitdagende konteks nie, maar om deurlopend braaf te wees in die soeke na nuwe maniere om my gemeente en gemeenskap te dien. Nuwe innovasie gaan altyd gepaard met die moontlikheid van mislukking. Daarom dat ek glo dat waagmoed die kleinkind van wysheid is. Ek werp my in hierdie opsig voor die wysheid van Sokrates wat gesê het, met graagte trou. As jy 'n goeie eggenoot kry, sal jy gelukkig wees. As jy 'n slegte eggenoot kry, sal jy 'n filosoof wees. As ek hierdie grappige gesegde kan transponeer na myself toe, dan hoor ek die volgende. As jy iets nuut probeer en dis 'n sukses, sal dit jou geluk verskaf. As dit misluk, sal jy groei in wysheid. En om vas te vat, dink ek, 'n jeugdige wysheid is 'n wysheid wat nimmer eindigend buigbaar is, aanpasbaar, nederig en ewig soekend na nuwe maniere om die kerk te dien in die soeke na God se onbelemmerde wil. Dankie, dis maar my take op wysheid.
Great, baie dankie Ernst. Dit is 'n mondvol en ek het baie probeer skryf, maar dankie. Dis 'n lekker perspektief. So ja, ons sal nou 'n bietjie daarop ingaan. Dewald.
If the panel will allow me, I'd like to speak about the perspective of young adults, maybe, if it's fine. Mostly from a white perspective. Before we started the conversation, I was thinking all the time, can I really contribute something? We are such a small part of South Africa, but that is the context in which I am serving currently. So I see times like this as a third world and a first world that we are living in. I've got young adults that can afford not to stay here anymore, and they have this conflict, must I stay? We had that hashtag staying slogan for quite a long time, so I don't want to go into that, but that's the first thing. I can afford it, must I go? And then I've got a few people who cannot afford it, and the question then is, what do I do here? So I think it's nobody is really feeling like this is home within my context. So I'm speaking from my context. Is this still home? I used the metaphor just before the time of my wife. She's standing in Dischem. She's a final year student, and she's in Dischem, and she's in the plaster row. And I see her buying all these plasters, and I'm like, "What are you doing?" She's like, the university is frustrating me, so I'm going to buy a lot of plasters to take with me to to the hospital to help. So it's that context of frustration, but also I want to make a difference, but sometimes my difference is just plasters for now. So I think I'm going to start with that, if it's fine with the panel.
Wonderlik, baie dankie Dewald. Thank you for your input at this point. I think what I heard initially or from everyone is the need for relevance, which I think we're going to have to address now is what are the problems that we need to address, how are we relevant in addressing those problems, but also as you said Charlotte, the need for change, die waagmoed waarvan jy gepraat het Ernst, that we are willing to take the risk to address or to make the changes, whatever those changes may be. And also the discussion, as you said, on people being lonely despite feeling more involved, Clarendi, and the whole thing of the personal space being constantly overwhelmed actually by the public space, that it's never something that you leave out there. So a lot of things to think about. And what I really appreciate, Ernst, is you mentioning that and then Dewald, you stating that your context is specifically white and Afrikaans at this point, is realizing that we're talking of different contexts. 'n Tyd soos hierdie is nie net 'n tyd, of is nie dieselfde, want die plek is nie dieselfde nie, die belewenis is nie dieselfde nie. So om daai nuance te behou. But yeah, so let's ask the next question, and that is, I think, the more difficult question. It's easy for us to see the struggles, the issues that we experience, but now, how do we engage with that as church? What is our role as church? How do we address the challenges? What are the changes that we need to make? Ja, so ek dink ek wil amper nou die vloer dalk ooplos. Ek wil graag hê elkeen moet 'n insaag gee, but as you feel, you know, so I'm not going to say you first, and so, but let's hear from each one. What would you say is the church role to address the times such as this?
Ek kan dalk begin. Ek hardloop eergister so 'n bietjie dorp se kant toe. Ek wil nou nie brag daaroor nie, maar nou hardloop ek hier af dorp toe en interessant, langs die pad is daar aan die linkerkant iemand wat besig is om hout te verkoop, maar sy tent is ook daar waarin hy gisteraand geslaap het. En Sondag aand tydens die erediens is daar vir my gesê moenie hout koop langs die pad nie, want ons stroop die omgewing. So ek wil dalk net iets van die konflik daarvan probeer verduidelik. As hy skies. Excuse, ek kan seker aangaan, nee, ja, sorry. Iets van die konflik van, moenie hout langs die pad koop nie, want ons stroop die omgewing, maar daar's iemand wat baie hard gewerk het, wat gisteraand in sy tent geslaap het, wat langs die pad hout verkoop, want dis sy manier om 'n lewe, om to earn a living, soos ons in goeie Engels sal sê. So dis maar die spanning waarmee ons werk, en ek het nou heel week gesit en wonder, wat kan ek van die kerk se kant af bydra aan? Die woord wat by my opkom is eenvoudig, en ek het nie 'n Afrikaanse woord daarvoor nie, is die woord mindfulness. Dis iets wat ek die laaste tyd net probeer deel maak van my denke, is hoe leef ek meer mindful in 'n wêreld wat ek nie eintlik lekker mee seker is hoe hy lyk nie. En as kerk dink ek is mindfulness ook iets wat ons dalk net meer op die tafel moet sit, is om net te vra, as ek die melk uit die yskas uithaal, waar kom dit vandaan? As ek iemand langs die pad sien wat besig is om hout te verkoop, ja, ons stroop die omgewing, dis hierdie konflik tussen ekologie en oorlewing, armoede, die vraagstukke, maar net om mindful te wees en net te vra, maar waar kom mense vandaan? En dan op 'n manier te probeer saam by 'n plek kom waar ons net 'n groter begrip vir mekaar het. Ek dink as net dit van die kerk se kant af, in my opinie, in die volgende paar jaar deel van die gesprek kan word, is hoe het ons begrip vir mekaar? How do we understand each other's context, and how do we appreciate that we are not living in the same South Africa? I think if we can just do that as church, we are a far way along. I'm going to end there for now, if it's fine. Thanks.
Right. Dankie Dewald. Ja, so 'n meer bewustelikheid, 'n greater awareness, and also om te dink oor dit wat ons waar alles vandaan kom en mense se rol en perspektief in verskeie fasette. Dat daar's 'n amper soos hy sê die spanning, daar's twee kante aan elke saak, en dat mens daai balans vind wat ek dink maar altyd moeilik is om te vind. Dankie. Enigiemand volgende?
Ek sal praat oor in James se preek van Sondag aand het hy bietjie oor die sink en swim konsep idioom eintlik gepraat. En ek het na dit bietjie gedink oor ook oor in terme van die tyd waarin ons lewe. Die sink of swem konsep het sien water of as die vyand of as 'n stuk gereedskap. So jy kan dis nie sink of float nie. As ek nou 'n bietjie bubblegum wysheid hierso kan kwytraak. Ek dink die tyd waarin ons leef is of iets wat jou gaan verdrink of dis iets wat jy kan gebruik om jouself vorentoe te laat gaan. En ek dink ons lewe in 'n konteks en in 'n wêreld waar daar oorvloedige geleenthede is om onsself op 'n verskeidenheid kreatiewe manier uit te druk in terme van hoe mens kerk kan leef en hoe jy mense betrokke kan maak by die kerk. Ons het byvoorbeeld, as ek nou uit my eie bediening uit kan praat, daar's soos uiteraard baie tieners wat regtig skaam is en rekenaarspeletjies speel. En ek is 35, maar ek is eintlik baie onvolwasse, so ek speel saam met hulle rekenaarspeletjies. En ons het byvoorbeeld oor die vakansie 'n projek gehad wat ons die kerkgebou in Minecraft gebou het. So en dis iets wat nie 20, 30 jaar terug enigstens moontlik sou wees nie, maar nou het ek hierdie geleentheid om hierdie stil ouetjie wat hy kyk nie eers in die oë nie, hy is verskriklik skaam, maar nou het ek 'n stuk gereedskap om sonder om vir hom te kyk aan die ander kant van Pretoria te sit en 'n rekenaarspeletjie met hom te speel en hy en sy vriendinnetjie begin vra my oor die toring van Babel en wat dink ek nou regtig het daar gebeur en sulke tipe goeie. So ek dink daarso is jy kan of sink of swem en ek weet dit is baie keer moeilik en dis hoekom ek ook oor die waagmoed gepraat het. Nie alles wat jy probeer gaan 'n sukses wees nie. Jy gaan baie keer met eier in die gesig huis toe gaan en dink, ek het nou 'n bazaar gereël en dit was eintlik maar ek en my vrou wat gebraai het. Maar so leer jy en so ek dink jy mens moet dit op jouself die kritiek vat nie. Ek dink ons het ander goeders probeer tot jy ietsie kry wat werk en ek weet dit is ontmoedigend. Ons het verlede jaar uitreik 'n deernag probeer reël wat 3 keer moes uitgestel word weens COVID. En teen die 4de keer is dit so moeilik om te bemark want nou is ek dink almal sê en dink okay, regtig ek gepraat en weer oor gaan dit regtig gebeur, gaan dit maar jy moet net aan probeer nuwe goeders doen en ek besef dit is moeilik en ek besef nie almal het dieselfde kaliberteit wat ek het nie, maar ek dink mens moet waagmoed hê en jy moet aanhou probeer entoesiasme hou om nuwe stukke gereedskap te kry om mee te swem in die kerk.
Right, baie dankie Ernst. Who's next, Larendi?
So ek wil graag by hom aansluit. Ek dink waarvan Ernst nou praat is een van die groot antwoorde waaraan ek ook gedink het. En dit is dat ons as die kerk moet gemeenskap skep. Ek dink dit is waar die wysheid lê van nou om regtig vir mense op hierdie stadium 'n gemeenskap te skep waar ons sê jy word gesien en jy is vir my belangrik om hier te wees. En ek dink dit is vir ons, vir julle of vir ons almal is dit so vanselfsprekend. Die Here wil hê daar moet 'n kerk wees, die Here wil hê daar moet 'n gemeenskap van gelowiges wees. Maar met almal met wie ek nou te doen het, is dit nie noodwendig so nie. Baie mense dink ek kan sommer 'n preek luister op 'n podcast terwyl ek werk toe ry of ek kan sommer net aanlyn goedjies doen of net 'n televisieprogram kyk en dit vervang my kerk. Maar ons moet vir onsself vra hoe ons regtig daai gemeenskap en daai koneksie met mense gaan vorm. Om vir julle 'n bietjie oor my eie konteks te vertel. My ma is oorlede toe ek gebore is en ek is grootgemaak deur my pa en my ouma. En hulle twee, persoonlik dink ek hulle was verskriklik net, jy weet, oorweldig met die hartseer. Hulle het vir 'n rukkie, toe ek groot geraak het, het hulle my eintlik groot gemaak met die Here en met die Bybel en geloof, maar ons het nie regtig die kerk bygewoon nie. En ek voel tot vandag toe, ek weet nie of dit so is of iemand dalk my net by die skool omgepraat of wat nie, maar ek voel die Heilige Gees het my na daai kerk toe gelei, want ek het self opgestaan Sondagoggende en self geloop, die kerk was 'n paar blokke van ons huis af, en daardie kerk gaan bywoon, en ek dink daai het gesprei uit 'n behoefte om deel te wees van ander mense, wat dieselfde glo as ek, en wat dieselfde dink as ek, en wat ook deel is van 'n gemeenskap van gelowiges. Ek het nog een punt hierop, ek dink ook, soos wat Tebogo gesê het, dat in hierdie tye, veral na COVID en op sosiale media en so, soek jong mense baie na antwoorde, na die waarheid. Wat is die waarheid? En ons het nie al die antwoorde in die kerk nie. As ons al die antwoorde gehad het, sou ons beslis nie nou hier gesit het nie. Maar ons het die waarheid. en ons kan die waarheid voorstaan. Dit is so maklik. Ons sê die waarheid, dit is so voor die hand liggend. So ek dink om partykeer in hierdie nitty-grittyheid van die hier en nou uit te kom. En te sê, kom ons vergeet van hierdie klein details. Kom ons dink aan die waarheid wat vir die ouetjie wat daar uitkom uit 'n ander geloof uit of van die straat af. Wat wil hy hoor? Hy wil die waarheid hoor. En wat wil hy daaruit kry? 'n Gemeenskap wat hom gaan ondersteun in daai waarheid. So dit is my perspektief.
Wonderlik, dankie Clarinie. Charlotte.
As they're talking, I'm thinking, as a church, the wisdom we can have right now is to stop having empathy and start showing compassion. And that's exactly wat die preek gesê het vanoggend. Toe sy gepraat het oor die agape en die gesed, daai tipe liefde vir mense. How do we do that? My context and in Hatfield is students. We have students in need, students who are there because of only being funded by NSFAS and so. So our church, NG Universiteitsoord, then has Green Leaf, which we started for this students, which is an English ministry, but that ministry is not just to every Sunday, tell them the word of God. It is to check what's the need that they have. Most of the students come from homes with absent fathers. Therefore, we get people in the church to come talk about the role of a father. Not just once, a few times. You repeat the cycle. Jana came to camp to talk to the students about mental health. You don't talk once about it, you talk about it every day. That is the need that students have because the suicide rate is huge among students. The other thing is with students, it is also finances. Most of our students come from homes where I was one of those students where mom is a domestic worker, so dit was 'n hand tot mond gesindheid van geld. Jy weet, dis al wat sy het en dis. So daar's nie die idee van finansies beplan en savings and investment en daai. Altyd het ek my maatjies gesien met 'n spaarblikkie and we didn't even daai ding het nie eens geklik nie en toe ek begin werk. Toe hoor ek das kredietkaarte, maar dis 'n storie vir 'n ander dag. So to educate young people on finances, someone on your church board is working for one of these companies and is a financial person. Every Sunday, every week, that is the need in Hatfield, that is the need in our community. Like Baron said earlier, we have different contexts and all you have to do is get out into the community and start the work. Nobody else is going to do it. Ons kan nie regeer blameer vir alles. Maar accountability, ek stem definitely saam. Maar as 'n kerk het ons hierdie resources in ons kerke. Van hulle is nie eers finansiëel nie, van hulle is gawes wat ons het. As lidmate, as dominees, as kerke, as 'n gemeenskap wat ons regtig vir hierdie jong mense kan gee en ek dink dit is wat ek bedoel met compassion. Dit is om prakties 'n need te sien in jou gemeenskap en dit te begin doen. Hy het iets gesê van hulle gaan potholes toe maak en goed. Dis 'n need in sy gemeenskap. In my gemeenskap hierdie jong mensies, dis hulle mental health. Dit is die single parent homes that they come from. It's mental health. So dis waarop ons fokus currently. En later is dit dalk iets anders, maar currently is dit vir ons as NG Universiteit vir die studente rondom ons om relevant te wees is om hulle te help met dit wat hulle nou mee sukkel terwyl hulle swat voor hulle vorentoe beweeg in hulle careers.
Right, bye, dankie Charlotte. So to walk for now, you're the last one to share your thoughts. You've got all the wisdom now, building on what they've said.
It's actually quite interesting that as they were speaking through, I literally have the points here about what I wanted to speak to, but it's just great how God works and He can manifest Himself in different forms and through different people. And the 3 points that I wanted to mention in terms of how the church can lead the change in this time, right? Sorry, and I'm looking at my phone to speak to the points. I'm not responding to a message. But the first point is around community. And I think I loved what Clarindy had mentioned. We live in a time where young people are overwhelmed with information. They are overwhelmed with perspectives that could be wrong, that could be right, right? And it is important for us to center our institutions around community for young people. Communities which will be a safe space for them to be able to practice their faith. We're living in a generation right now where, for example, if I decide to have a prayer on a table, some person feels that I'm infringing on their beliefs. And that is their standpoint and that is their viewpoint. So how do you then now, as an institution or as a church, provide a safe space for young people to practice their faith, but also to test their thinking? Because what I've come to find out, when I'm in corporate spaces or when I'm on Twitter, is you see people putting out opinions that maybe might not be correct. But a church, as a community, a church community of young people, is a safe space for them to test their thinking and ask myself, is what I'm thinking actually correct? Is it in line with the Word of God and what the Word of God prescribes on how I may give Him glory, right? And these are important things that we need to think about. The second point is around representation. The fundamental point that I want to talk about in terms of a journey of a child, about the two fundamental institutions that they would witness in their lives. South Africa being a predominantly Christian country, is that there are two institutions that this young person will see throughout their lives. Number one is their school. Number two is the church, if they are based in a church. And if we model an environment in a church that is not representative of the world that they're going to see out there, we need to remember these young people are going to become CEOs tomorrow. These are the young people that we are trusting to solve the unemployment issues that are taking place in this country. We cannot allow business to be leading us in terms of representation. In a country that is 51% female, the church needs to represent it to a degree. And we need to be confident in that. And why do I say so? Because that young person grows up with the perspective that, yes, women are equal than, black people are equal than, Indian people are equal than, colored people are equal than. Why? Because it shapes the frame of the mindset that they will see tomorrow. And that's how we prevent situations where we go into corporate and we see young people that have been modeled in a specific way because they grew up in a small community. The only thing that they saw is white people. The only single thing that they saw is white men preaching on a pulpit every single Sunday. I know I'm rattling a few feathers here, but I have to mention it, right? Because as an institution, it builds a perspective of the world that young people are going to see tomorrow, right? So I think that's an important point that I wanted to mention. And then the final point is around the topic of relevance, as Karinti had mentioned. Young people continually interact and see topics around sexual orientation, see topics around multiple things. But we need to have a point of view in the church as well and be able to educate and tell our young people that, look, this is what the Word of God is saying about this perspective. Because they're getting different views from politics, they're getting different views from, America and these different young people all across the world. And what we need to do is just to make sure, how can we provide that safe space for young people to have these debates and ask them, okay, cool. If a young person comes to you on a topic around sexual orientation, how do I address it from my perspective as a Christian young person? And it is important for us to give them that view and to give them and equip them with the tools on how to speak to people that may be unbelievers. Because we have to also agree and understand that not everyone that we're going to come across is a believer. So how do I confidently put my opinion and point across about my faith without infringing on another person's beliefs? And that's wisdom for a time like this.
Great. Thank you so much, Tebogo. Before we go into the tables, we're going to give some time for you to discuss the questions at hand as well. Iets wat ek dalk sommer net wil bydra, and we will give a few minutes of questions to the panel after the table discussions. But something, what you mentioned now, which is just has been running in my mind, someone who has been working in the church context for the past 10 years, and now moving into a context where, being in university, and I think the majority of people like ons ouderlinge en die hakens wat nie heeltyd met kerk werk nie. For me, it was so strange now to go on a camp with students and we don't pray before a session, or we didn't pray. And I know this is how business works the past 30 years. It's just new for me, having been in the church. And to realize, I've got
different perspectives on sexuality, on gender. I've got different faith perspectives. And for me to realize, and it kind of links in with what Tebogo just said, I think to a large extent, in the world, it has become almost, you should be careful not to be a Christian, because what was white and Christian and male is now kind of shunned because that was the oppressing narrative for so long. Now, I don't want to focus on the male and the white part, but the fact that often Christian values are even considered, or if you to putting that up front. And I just realized the thing of, I am allowed to be me in this world just as everyone else is allowed to be them. With a woke culture that sometimes screams louder than we do, and with different perspectives, to realize in the different contexts we find ourselves, that with respect and dignity, acknowledging that I have a different viewpoint to someone else, it doesn't mean that I have to shy away from the fact that this is my viewpoint. I don't have to be offensive about sharing it and conveying it and discussing with others. For instance, it was very interesting for me in my discussion with some of the students who are not people of faith, to be able to say, I was a co-pastor, and we just had a discussion of some trauma that the person experienced, which was very unexpected. It's not really my job description. But after having discussed it with her, she, at some point I was just like, can I pray for you? Which is not my role, and she isn't a Christian per se, and she still said, okay, yes, please do. And I think that's something we need to realize is we have such a valid space in a world and in a country that not everyone thinks the same anymore. So to step into our identity as Christians in all the various spheres that we interact. So, julle het nou baie om gehoor, en hopelik is jou gedagtes aan die gang gesit. Miskien is jy opgewonde gemaak met dit wat ons gehoor het. Miskien is jy uitgedaag. Ons wil nou vir jou die geleentheid gee daar rondom die tafel, wat julle dan nou, ons is so net voor half, ons gaan so 10-12 minute gee vir julle vir 'n tafelgesprek. Wat sien jy ons tyd nou? Wat is die wysheid wat jy dalk vir die kerk sal wil sê? En dan gaan ons die gesprek, ons gaan geleentheid gee vir 'n paar vragies aan die paneellede, en dan sal ek vir ons net 'n samevatting doen. So kom ons gee so 10 minute vir julle om rondom die tafels te gesels. Goed. Ek sien daar is 'n baie duidelike aanduiding dat die tyd verstreke is. Time is up. So ek wil graag, ek sien ons het, kom ons sê so 10 minute vir geleentheid vir vrae van die vloer af aan enige van die paneellede. Ek dink tydgebonde gaan dit moeilik wees as jy 'n vraag aan almal wil stel, maar as jy 'n spesifieke vraag het aan almal, kan jy, ek dink ons gaan net daai een vraag dan hanteer, maar andersins, as jy graag 'n vraag wil stel aan een van die paneellede in die lig van die gesprek, dan is jy baie welkom. So, ons vra dat jy asseblief na een van die mikrofone toe beweeg. Ek weet julle ken nou al mekaar teen hierdie tyd, maar ons doen nie, so noem dalk net jou naam voordat jy die vraag stel, en dan luister ons graag. Thanks. Is hy daar so die mikrofoon aan? Ek sien ons het daar.
1, 2. Thank you very much. I'm Katleo from Pretoria. I wanna thank you very much, young people. I'm excited because I've been sitting down and not having an opportunity to come here. But when I saw young people, I thought, let me come and ask this question. Professor Tulima Dwanzela spoke about PPA, which is the picture, the purpose, and the action. I want to ask the young people that are there, what is the picture that you see for NGO specifically 10 years to come? What is the picture that you see for NGO specifically for 10 years to come? Number 2, I want to ask this question in terms of the succession plan. I know young people are energetic, and if you are living in an era of Samuel, who's not in the temple, but who hears voices, whether from social media, speaking to you, you're running up and down because there was no one who did and intentional, because mentorship is intentional. I don't believe on mentorship where you have to raise your hands. That's not the Jesus way. He says, follow me. If you get yourself in such a situation where you are a young person, your energies, we see them, they are all over the place because there is no intentional mentorship coming to them. That's why now they go all over the place in terms of fresh expression. What would you do in such a situation where the voice of the church, we're losing young people to other fresh expressions that has different doctrine? As the NG church, as youth, what would be your advice? Because succession plan is important in the kingdom. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Lehu. So let's give is there anyone who's, okay, Charlotte first, and maybe a second person who'd like to answer? So Clarindi, and yeah, then thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for that question. The second question I'm going to leave to my smart, lovely colleagues. And then, sorry. And then the first one makes me very excited because Govis Mayberg will tell you guys, I share this with everybody. The NG picture, as it currently looks like, I love my beautiful people sitting here. It's not resembling the picture of how South Africa looks like. We know that. We are aware of that. But the 10 years, I have a dream to share with you guys that I uitnodig was die woord wat vanoggend gebruik was. Wat ek julle wil I want to invite you to also think about this image on how we can work on it. In the NG church, we are struggling with diversity in terms of having this picture in our churches. We know that. It is something that we are working on as churches, and so we have tried a lot of different things. But I am thinking that as the church, as synods, as ringsitting, as people who are sitting here, if we as churches invest in students of color, black students, Indian students, students who want to study theology, to become NG dominees, to become in our churches, because I am 110% sure I'm not the only black person who woke up and decided I want to be an NG dominee. You know, there's a lot of other black people who are open to diversity, unity, Saam kerke, soos ons land lyk. Julle verstaan, julle hoor my hart. Therefore, we know that education is expensive. Even a theology degree where people think we only pray the whole day is expensive. So if we as churches, as synods, as ringsittings, invest in one black student or one student of color a year, then the picture you're talking about, sir, in the church will look very different, because when we say as NG Kerk, almal is welkom, it has to look like that on our panel. The almal that we are defining, dankie, the almal that we are defining has to look like almal van ons. As much as I'm alone in my church, I have hope. Jy het gepraat van mense wat wil gaan. Yo, it makes me sad. Because our country has so much talent, so much resources, opportunities. En ons in die kerk even, jy weet, ek kan die hele dag hieroor praat, maar my droom vir die kerk is, as ons almal as kerke, ek is 110% elke tafel ken een swart persoon. Now I changed language, sorry sir. I'm 110% sure that everyone sitting here knows someone of color that loves God, that would want to be part of this church. As South Africa, when we say we are healing from our history and we are moving forward, it has to look like that on our synod, on our ringsitting, on our budget, in our theology faculties. We can't hold history as an excuse. We can't hold. We have to heal and forgive and move on together. Saam as 'n land is die enigste manier hoe die NG Kerk. Dis my baie sleg dat Afrikaanse mense worry dat hulle 4.iets miljoen is. Julle rol as mense verander nie. Dit beteken nie 'n mens moet vlug nie. How many black people were you guys when you went to Afrikaans school?
In the high school or the primary school?
Primary, both.
Primary school, I'd say in my grade, we were the only black class of 20 people out of 7, for example, in a grade. Of each class had 20 people. So that would work out maybe to be about 10% in a grade.
Ek wil dit nie 'n kleur ding maak nie, verstaan my baie mooi. Maar ons was 10 swart mense by laerskool Pierneef. Daarom 'n bietjie meer by hoërskool Hendrik Vervoort. But we didn't leave, probably because we don't have the funds, yes, but also I now have the opportunity, and when you have the opportunity, we didn't leave because South Africa has so much to offer. Die diversiteit van die liggaam van die Here moet so lyk in ons kerk. So all I'm saying is, give us a chance, because as a church, we are working on it. We can sit here and give all the beautiful things that we are currently doing. But my dream for the church, for my church, for the NG Kerk, is for us to put it in our budget, in our Senate budget, in our church budgets, in that, and sponsor. I'm a sponsored student. I didn't pay for my, I came through this thing with a bursary, and if we do that as churches, then your 10-year picture, sir, and the voice of the church will speak for itself.
Right, dankie Charlotte. Ek sien ons tyd, ek weet nie hoe streng is ons op die tyd vir die Q&A en of ek mag, is ons baie streng. Nee, ons gaan eet, maar ons wil daarmee net almal 'n kans gee. Ek sal mooi voor 6 klaar maak. Ek wil, Claridie, is dit okay as ek aangaan na 'n volgende vraag? Ek sien hier's nog 3 vrae, né? Daar's 2 by daai mikrofoon en dan Andre by daai ene. So kom ons gee kans gou daar. Ons vra vir een paneellid om te antwoord. Jy hoef nie te rush nie, maar kom ons kyk. Ons gaan so 'n bietjie verby die Q&A tyd gaan, maar my opsomming sal kort wees, ek beloof. Julle sal 6 uur hopelik hier uit wees.
Jana, kan ons nie reël dat hulle die 3 vrae vra en dan besluit julle wie van die paneel gaan op watter vraag antwoord nie?
Wonderlike idee, dankie Dewyk. So.
Tiaan van die kerk van NG Rietfontein Noord, deep in the mud, Charlotte, where you grew up. This is a question just from the table side, so I'm asking it on behalf of the table. So, how do you feel, you as a panel, how do you feel about discipline among young people as a concept, as young people often seem to be undisciplined? That's the question from the table as I have it, so interpret it as you want. Thank you.
Great, thanks Tiaan. Hoe sien julle dissipline onder jong mense? Dan Andre?
Also, our question comes from the table. 2 questions. So the first one is about resilience and young people. There's also the understanding or the observation that young people, especially now teenagers at school, struggle with resilience, quitting very easily, and young adults at work changes a lot of jobs. So how, now I can't even remember exactly where the question is. Maybe how to build resilience, or is that a true observation? Maybe just an answer on that. And the second one is about connection and building a community. It's very nice words, but the how about connection and building a community. Thank you.
Great, thank you Andre. En dan laaste vraag.
Rassie Erasmus van Waverley. I'm a developmental pediatrician, and we see children up to the age of 18 years. And we've seen a lot of children recently with severe anxiety disorders and even depression. My son is a psychiatrist, and he tells me that he sees a lot of young adults and young middle-aged people with anxiety disorders and depression. And there's a lot of reasons for that we're not going to go in through. But things like adolescents are worried about 2 years that they've lost in school, and parents and families have concerns about financial problems and work problems and other things. So what we find is that the children are not safe anymore in their families, because the families, their parents, are also anxious. And I have a daughter that we adopted, and she's working in another church in Potchefstroom under the young people. She says there is incredible longing for people to belong, and they find this in church, because that's the only place that they can find hope, and they can find love, and they can find security. And I think that's extremely important for us as church in this time, to be a safe haven for these young people and adolescents. So maybe you can comment on that, but just a comment from my side. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Rassi. I'm going to say, Rassi, actually, your comment was fantastic, and we touched on that. So I'm going to just give the first two questions. The one about discipline. How do young people respond to discipline? Do they have discipline? And it slightly links to it, but the resilience. Do they have resilience? Is that a perception? And how do we create community? So I think let's focus on the first two. Is anyone open? Who wants to go? Okay, Tebogo and then Clarindi, and then we'll close off. I'll summarize after that.
I'll just quickly answer the question around resilience, right? We have to be a bit aware that the schooling system and the world of work is totally different than the way that, perhaps, I could be wrong, that it was, I think, when majority of the people in the crowd were growing up or were developing as professionals. Number one, I think technology has enabled us to have our video conferencing apps on our phones. So I always stay connected. As a consultant, for example, I work with a US-based team. They will message me at all times in the evening and say, hey, we need you to fix this, we need you to fix that. So it's important to understand that the world that the young people are living in today is so transformed. And we should not use that as a measure to say then that young people are not resilient. Yes, it's much more tough. And I think the broader question to be asking ourselves is, how do we enable young people to be more effective and a bit more resilient in the world that they currently live in today? And one of the biggest ways and the methods is just to advise them to take a bit more time away from this phone, right? Because the work is connected to the phone. The schooling is connected to the phone. If you take a bit more time away from it, it takes you away from the distractions of work and school, and you can focus on the other elements of your life that make you whole. Family, your relationship with God. And this is, in my humble opinion, is the way that we can advise them, because if we look at resilience and how one becomes resilient, you need to look at what are the spheres of a person's lives that make them whole. And if they're spending too much time on school, or if they're spending too much time on work, or being too much distracted on work-related things, they won't get the opportunity to focus on the aspects and the spheres of their lives that make them whole. So encourage them to spend more time on the things that make them happy, that make them joyful, that make them connect, such as environments like this, where there is a community for church, where after they have a session, they'll feel inspired to go back to work and add more. So we've got to encourage them a bit more to be more disconnected to work, because they always stay connected. And that's, I think, the big thing that we need to realize.
Great, thanks to Tebogo. Clarindi, our final answer.
Yes, that's what I also said in my point, is that now kids are so overwhelmed by their world coming into their personal space that they can't focus on other things. But I would say that in terms of discipline, my personal opinion is that older generations will always feel that the youngest are undisciplined. I actually think today's youth has incredible resilience. If you speak to some of the teachers who's been working with the kids in the past, in the COVID time, you'll hear that what they're saying is the kids were incredibly resilient. They were incredibly open to all of the new regulations. They just swam and fit in with that. And then where we as a church what we must look out for is those few ones who weren't able to cope with that. But I think the majority of them were able to adapt really well and to cope really well and still do their matric and still do what's expected of them. So just the important practical question there, how we create this community. So to speak about an example, we recently this year started at a new church where we stay in a small community. And we decided to go and see what the church was like. So we just attended one service. And then after that service, literally someone was running after us, and then they immediately asked our cell phone numbers, and I promise you guys, in that week, we had a visit from one of the congregation members. He was attending our house, he prayed for us, everything. So I just thought, and then we went again because we felt like, yes, someone who really sees us. And just to speak about another example, when I was a student, my husband was actually in a residence that had a lot of people who were atheists. And a lot of people on his corridor were atheists. And what he needed at that time, with these people who were asking the real difficult questions, you guys know all about it, why is there so much suffering with a loving God, things like that. He needed to have some apologetic training to know what to answer to them on a logistical basis, to be able to engage with them, to be able to get them to church. And at that time, his church did offer something like that. They had a youth group where they were able to talk about apologetics, to talk about the real questions that students have. You know, students don't just ask the easy ones. So I think that's a good place to start in our communities. Why don't we have a night or an event where youth can come and ask those real questions, and we try to answer them together.
Right. Thank you so much to all our panelists, Dewald, Arends, Charlotte, Clarindi, and Tebogo, who drove very far to be here and are heading back tonight as well. So we obviously pray for your safe travels. Thank you for sharing your thoughts and wisdom with us. Ek wil graag net so 'n bietjie saamvat wat ek gehoor het. Natuurlik het elkeen iets meer of iets anders gehoor. Ek dink the reality is, in a sense, Clarindi said, there's not a lot of change. There's always war, there's always poverty and stuff. And in a sense, what I picked up is wisdom, I want to say, remains the same. The things that were important 10,000 years, 2,000 years, 100 years ago are still important. Is community, feeling that you belong, that you're part of a family, which we know we have to create. It's die waagmoed waarvan Arends gepraat het, to take risks, and actually waagmoed of om risiko's te neem, that is what faith is. It's about Peter climbing out of the boat when he is in a storm and he's going to step onto water. Dis om nie te weet nie en die risiko's te neem dat ons gaan misluk. Iets wat vir my waardevol of treffend was in a book titled now I can't remember, the Patience of the Early Church. Ek gaan nou die naam kry. Ek sal hom sê later. It was a statement that I've kept with me since I read it. The Patient Ferment of the Early Church, great book to read. And he says, the early church lived with the conviction that God is God and they are not. And they will do what they should do, and if it succeeds, it's in God's hand, and if it fails, in our perspective, it's also in God's hand. En ek dink iets van daai ding van die uitnodiging vir ons as kerk is altyd bereid te wees om risiko's te neem, om 'n tree in geloof te vat, om aan te hou gemeenskap te skep, saam met mekaar, by mekaar, en dan natuurlik te vra wat is die behoeftes, want elke konteks, soos ons 3 keer of klomp keer gesê het, is verskillend. So mag ons met ons gawes, ons wysheid, ons geloof, bereid wees om saam met mekaar die verskil te maak in hierdie land en hierdie wêreld wat God van ons vra. Dewijk, Paul, julle, dankie vir die geleentheid. Weer eens dankie aan ons paneellede. Ons is klaar.
Dankie, Jana. Chris.